He said, "Give me my daughter," and his voice was cold steel, an order, not a request. He stood at the threshold of my life, a ghost I thought I had long since buried, and behind him, the faces of his pack were a wall of silent judgment. They filled the narrow hallway of my building, their presence a suffocating weight, their alpha sense a hostile tide crashing against the flimsy door of my apartment. Inside, behind me, a small whimper escaped Yuna's lips. It was a sound that pierced straight through my soul. And next to me, I felt the solid, unwavering presence of Sijuan. His hand finding mine, a silent promise in the dark. "Stay behind me," he had said. His voice a low rumble meant only for me. But for the first time in 4 years, I knew I couldn't. The fear that had been my constant companion, the shame that had been my shadow, I had to walk past them. I had to face the storm myself. But to understand the hurricane that was Liwan, and the anchor that was Sijuan, we have to go back to the moment my world shattered, all because of 5 simple, desperate words. Pride, I had once thought, was all I had left. It was a brittle, hollow thing, but it was mine. Yet, as I gazed down at my daughter, Yuna, cradled in my arms, that pride crumbled into ash. Her breathing was a fragile rhythm against my chest, as faint and unsteady as a sparrow's wing caught in a storm. Her lips, usually so quick to smile, were a pale, bloodless line. Her eyelids heavy, casting long shadows on a face that was far too small for such immense suffering. She was only 4, a lifetime of scraped knees and bedtime stories still ahead of her, but she looked as if she'd already fought 1,000 wars. And in a way she had. Every day was a battlefield, a fight against the gnawing emptiness in her stomach, a fight against the fever that consumed her small body. A fight against a world that had turned its back on the child of an Omega who had nothing to his name but shaking hands and a heart carved out by betrayal. My fingers, trembling slightly, brushed a few strands of silken black hair from her brow. She was burning. The fever was back, a relentless inferno raging within her. The doctor's words from months ago echoed in my mind. A chilling prophecy I couldn't escape. Her heart was failing. A defect, a cruel twist of fate woven into her from birth. Surgery, he had said, his voice clinical and distant. Surgery was the only answer. And it was an answer that came with a price tag I couldn't even begin to comprehend. Yuna. My own voice was a fractured whisper as I pressed my lips to her feverish skin. "Don't go to sleep just yet, little one. Please just stay with mommy a little while longer." In response, her tiny hand, impossibly frail, gave a faint twitch against my shirt. She was so thin, a collection of delicate bones held together by skin and sheer will. Malnutrition, another word the doctors used, another failure that I wore like a brand on my soul. An Omega alone, without a pack, without a mate, without a single thread of support in this vast, uncaring world. How could I have ever thought I could nourish her, keep her strong, when my own body was wasting away, starved of both food and hope? I had tried. Gods, how I had tried. I begged for extra hours at the late-night convenience store, the fluorescent lights buzzing a dreary song of my exhaustion. I spent nights on my hands and knees, scrubbing the floors of empty office buildings, the smell of bleach clinging to me like a second skin. But it was never enough. It was a pittance against the mountain of debt, a drop in the ocean of what she needed. Not for the surgery, not for the medicine, not even for the nourishing food that might have kept the fevers at bay. All I had was my pride. It was the last standing pillar in the ruins of my life. The one thing that prevented me from collapsing into dust. I clung to the mantra that even after Lee Wan had left, even after he had shattered our promises and cast me aside for her, for Senna, I could do this alone. I could be enough for Yuna. I would shield her from the world. I would prove to him, to everyone, that an Omega's worth wasn't measured by the Alpha they belonged to. But holding her now, her life a flickering flame in my arms, so weak she couldn't even summon the energy to cry, I understood the devastating truth. Pride was a luxury I could no longer afford. Pride meant nothing if it meant burying my daughter. In that moment of stark clarity, my hand acted of its own accord. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking so violently that the screen blurred before my eyes. His name was still there in my contacts, a digital ghost I hadn't dared to summon in years. Just a single letter, a monument to a love that had turned to poison. A knot of bile and memory tightened in my throat, but I forced my thumbs to move. Yuna is dying. You are the father. The instant I pressed send, the air rushed out of my lungs in a ragged gasp. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering to the floor as if it had seared my skin. It was done. I had incinerated 4 years of stubborn, agonizing pride with 5 words. I pressed my forehead against Yuna's, my own tears mingling with the sweat on her skin, whispering apologies to her, to myself. I tried to shut down my mind, to not imagine his reaction. Would he even read it? Or would he just delete it without a second thought? Would he show it to Senna, the two of them sharing a cruel laugh at my pathetic desperation? Would he call, just to tell me once more that I was a mistake, that he had never loved me, that she was his true choice and I had been nothing more than a temporary diversion? I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the crushing silence that was sure to follow. But then my phone buzzed, and buzzed again, and then it began to vibrate uncontrollably, a frantic, insistent alarm. Confused, my heart hammering against my ribs, I picked it up. My blood turned to ice as I saw the screen. The horrible, cataclysmic reality of my mistake crashed down on me. In my haste, in my shaking desperation, I hadn't sent the message to him. I had sent it to my old PAX group chat. The chat I had muted years ago. A silent graveyard of friendships I couldn't bear to face. I couldn't stand their pitying glances, couldn't bear for them to see the full extent of my failure, to see how far I had fallen. The screen was a chaotic explosion of notifications. A flood of unread messages scrolling by at an impossible speed. Voices from a past I had tried to erase now shouting in digital form. Shock, confusion, dozens of questions. And then, at the very top, a private message notification slid into view, eclipsing everything else. Sejuan, Pac Alpha, where are you? My stomach plummeted. Sejuan, the PAX Alpha, the one man I had actively avoided more than anyone else. I couldn't handle his pity, his calm lectures on duty and responsibility. He had always been kind to me, an unwavering, gentle kindness that felt more like an accusation than a comfort. His kindness was a mirror, and in it, I saw all my weakness, all my broken pieces, laid bare for him to see. My fingers hovered over the screen. My mind screamed at me to type. It was a mistake. I'm fine. Forget you saw it. But before I could form the lie, another message appeared. Sejuan, Haiyan Wu, answer me. Now, I bit down on my lip, the sharp tang of blood filling my mouth. Every fiber of my being, every shard of my shattered pride, screamed at me to push him away, to handle this alone. But then I felt it, the faint, fluttering beat of Yuna's heart against my palm. It was a whisper, but it was louder than the screaming in my head. "Mommy," she breathed, her voice so soft it was barely a thread of sound. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here," I choked out, the ache in my chest becoming a physical pain. She blinked, her dark eyes struggling to focus on my face. "Hungry," she managed to say. The word shattered what was left of my composure. Tears I didn't know I still had blurred my vision. I buried my face in the crook of her tiny neck, trying to smother a sob that threatened to tear me apart. My beautiful girl was starving, and I couldn't even give her that. My phone buzzed again, a final, definitive command. "Sejun, I'm coming to get you." When I finally opened the door, I was braced for a tempest. I expected Sejun to unleash his fury, to berate me for my recklessness, for hiding Yuna away from the pack, for being so foolishly proud that I would let my own child wither away rather than ask for help. What I didn't expect was the profound, heavy silence. Sejun stood on my doorstep, a formidable presence against the dim hallway light. He was tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the world. His dark hair slick with rain as if he'd run the whole way here. His jaw was set, a hard, sharp line, but as his gaze fell from my face to the fragile child in my arms, I saw it soften, the anger replaced by a deep, wrenching pain. "Hyen Woo," he said, his voice a low, steady baritone. It was too steady, too calm, and it unnerved me more than any shouting could have. My throat felt like it was coated in sand. I hated how small and inadequate he made me feel just by standing there. I hated how his scent, rich and grounding, pine and cold night air, an unmistakable alpha aura, flooded my tiny apartment, stirring memories and instincts I had fought so hard to suppress. I pulled Yuna closer, using her as a shield. "You shouldn't have come." "I had to," he replied, his eyes fixed on Yuna. "She looks—" He faltered, his voice cracking for a fraction of a second before he regained his composure. "She needs to be in a hospital. Right now." My defenses flared instantly. I took her, I snapped, my grip on her tightening. "They told me what she needs. She needs surgery. She needs money that we don't have." His gaze snapped back to me, sharp and piercing. "And you were just going to let her—" He couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. I saw his hand clench into a fist at his side. "No, I won't let that happen." I glared up at him, the sting of my pride burning hotter than the shame that was consuming me. "She is not your responsibility. She's Pac," he retorted, his voice unwavering. His alpha presence pressed in on me, not aggressive, but a heavy, undeniable wave of authority, which makes her my responsibility. The sheer force of his dominance made my knees feel weak. For years I had bowed my head, to Li Wan, to his dismissive family, to a society that whispered omegas were incomplete without an alpha. But I straightened my spine, refusing to yield. I would not bow again. "No," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "You don't get to just swoop in now and play the hero because I made one stupid mistake. This is my burden to bear. My daughter. My problem." He took a step forward, closing the space between us. He was too close. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the clean, wintry scent of him. A foolish, primal part of my omega nature wanted to lean into that strength, to seek shelter there. I held Yuna tighter, a fragile barrier between us. "You call this pride, Hyen Woo," Sejun said, his voice dropping to a quiet, intense murmur. "I call it self-flagellation. You're punishing yourself because he abandoned you. And you're punishing her in the process." The words were like daggers, striking a nerve so deep it stole my breath. "I'm not," I whispered, the denial weak even to my own ears. I swallowed against the lump in my throat. "I'm not punishing her. I'm doing everything I can." "It's not enough," he whispered back, and this time, it was his voice that sounded broken. "Not when I'm here. Not when I can help." His hand moved, slowly, tentatively, as if he expected me to flinch away. He gently brushed the back of his knuckles against Yuna's pale, translucent cheek. In her fevered state, my daughter stirred. Her eyelashes fluttered against her skin, and then, a miracle. A tiny, weak, yet unmistakable smile graced her lips. "Daddy," she murmured, the single word a soft sigh. Both of our heads snapped down to look at her. My heart stopped beating. "He's not," I started to say, to correct her, but the words caught in my throat, strangled by a sudden, overwhelming emotion. Sijuan's expression transformed. The hardness melted away, replaced by something raw and unguarded that I couldn't decipher. He didn't pull his hand away. He didn't correct her. He simply leaned in closer, his voice a soft, reassuring whisper. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm here." Tears welled in my eyes, hot and unstoppable. I turned my head away, ashamed of my weakness, hating how effortlessly he had stepped into a role I had guarded so fiercely. But the truth was there, a painful, undeniable certainty. My daughter, who hadn't smiled in weeks, had just smiled. And it wasn't for me. It was for him. I've never been one for visitors. Not the well-meaning neighbors, not the distant relatives, not even the pack members who would sometimes appear with pitying smiles and questions I had no desire to answer. My home, this cramped, suffocating space, was the one place on earth I could pretend I had some semblance of control. But Sijuan didn't just visit. He moved in. 3 days had passed since he had walked through my door like a quiet force of nature and embedded himself in our lives, with or without my permission. 3 days of him preparing nourishing meals I hadn't tasted in years, the aromas filling the apartment with a sense of warmth it had never known. 3 days of him holding Yuna in his strong arms as if she were made of the most delicate porcelain, humming low melodies to her when the fevers kept her from sleep. 3 days of his scent seeping into the very walls, a constant, calming presence that, to my shame, made my own tense shoulders begin to relax. I despised it. I despised how right it felt. And I despised myself for craving it so desperately. "Mommy," Yuna's voice, still frail but with a newfound clarity, pulled me from my thoughts. She was sitting on the worn-out sofa, clutching a small, fluffy teddy bear Sijuan had produced from his bag on the first night. "Can Daddy stay with us forever?" A familiar tightness constricted my chest. "Yuna, he's just helping until you feel all better," I corrected gently, though the words felt like a lie. Her face fell, and she looked up at me with her wide, dark eyes, as if afraid I was about to scold her. "Please?" she whispered. "He makes the soup taste good." And he made the scary light stop buzzing. I froze. The damned fluorescent light in our tiny bedroom had been flickering for months, casting jumpy, unsettling shadows that frightened her at night. I never had the money or the energy to get it fixed. But Sijuan had replaced it the night before, without a word, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. As if all the broken things that had worn me down for years could be mended with such simple, quiet competence. I sat down next to her, pulling the thin blanket over her lap. Don't get attached, sweetheart. He has his own life to live. She pouted, hugging the bear to her chest. But I like him here. Before I could formulate a response, a sharp, insistent knock echoed from the front door. My stomach instantly clenched into a knot of dread. Sujuin emerged from the kitchen, drying his hands on a dish towel, his brow furrowed. He could sense my anxiety like a change in the air. I opened the door just a crack, and my first instinct was to slam it shut and bolt it. It was Li Wan, my ex-mate, my first alpha, the man who had fractured my soul so completely I believed it could never be whole again. He looked both different and achingly the same. The arrogant handsomeness was still etched into his sharp features, but there was a harshness around his eyes I didn't remember. And those eyes, they didn't linger on me. They swept past me, scanning the room, and when they landed on the small figure on the couch, his breath hitched audibly. Yuna, he breathed. My hand tightened on the doorknob until my knuckles were white. What are you doing here? His jaw clenched. I heard about the message. My blood ran cold. Behind me, Sijuin's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. Haiyan Wu. Who is this? Li Wen's gaze shifted, moving past my shoulder, and his eyes narrowed with contempt when he saw another alpha standing in my apartment as if he owned the place. What the hell is he doing in my home? Li Wan demanded. The atmosphere in the room grew thick, charged with unspoken violence. Alpha dominance slammed against alpha dominance, a palpable pressure that made the air feel thin and hard to breathe. My body reacted on pure instinct, moving to shield Yuna from the crushing weight of their confrontation. She let out a small whimper, her hands clutching her teddy bear like a lifeline. Stop it, I yelled, the sound raw and shocking even to me. My voice trembled, but I stood my ground between them. Both of you, stop it right now. You're scaring her. Instantly, the suffocating pressure receded. Both alphas had their eyes locked on me, and for the first time since Li Wan had left, I wasn't just the discarded Omega he'd left behind. I was a parent, a protector, and my child's fear was a weapon far more powerful than their pride. Li Wan didn't leave. Of course he didn't. He lingered in the doorway, his expression a familiar cocktail of stubbornness and entitlement that I knew all too well. It was the look that always preceded him getting exactly what he wanted. Except this time, what he wanted wasn't me. His gaze kept sliding past me to Yuna, and the possessive gleam in his eyes hurt in a way I hadn't anticipated. She looks unwell, he stated finally, his tone casual, as if discussing the weather. My arms tightened instinctively around myself. She is, I said, my voice clipped, and your presence is not helping. His brow furrowed in annoyance. She is my daughter, Haiyan Wu. The words struck me like a physical blow. My daughter. He had never once claimed her. Not during the lonely months of my pregnancy. Not when I gave birth in a sterile hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and despair. Not in any of the countless times I had swallowed my pride and begged him for a scrap of help, only to be told his life was with Senna now. But now, faced with another alpha in his perceived territory, suddenly she was his. Before I could unleash the torrent of bitter words rising in my throat, Sijuin moved. He positioned himself fluidly between Li Wan and me, his tall frame a solid, unbreachable wall. His alpha scent flared, not aggressively, but as a steady, protective shield that calmed my racing heart despite myself. She's Pac, Sijuin said, his voice deceptively calm, though his eyes blazed with a cold fire. That places her under my protection. A right you forfeited the moment you abandoned them. Lewin's jaw tightened. This has nothing to do with you. It became my business the second Hyen Wu sent out a cry for help. Sijuan replied, his tone like sharpened steel. I didn't cry for help. I snapped, my pride rearing its wounded head. But both men ignored me completely. Yuna stirred on the couch, her voice a faint whisper. Mommy? That was it. I couldn't let her be a pawn in their territorial game. Enough, I hissed, my voice cutting through their standoff. Both of you. Not here. Not in front of her. Sijuan immediately turned to me, his expression softening with concern. Hyen Wu, but I couldn't look at him. I turned away, scooped Yuna into my arms, and carried her back towards the bedroom, her small body trembling against mine. My heart was pounding so violently I could barely hear the low murmur of their continued argument behind me. When I emerged minutes later, having tucked Yuna in and promised her everything was okay, Sijuan was still standing by the door like a sentinel. Li Wan, for the moment, was gone. Where is he? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Gone back to whatever hole he crawled out of, Sijuan muttered, his jaw still tense. But he'll be back. I sank onto the couch, the fight draining out of me, and buried my face in my hands. I don't have the strength for this, Sijuan. He was in front of me before I even registered him moving, kneeling on the floor. His large, warm hands gently but firmly pried mine away from my face. He held them, forcing me to meet his gaze. His eyes searched mine with a raw, searing intensity that made my chest ache. Then let me be your strength. I froze, caught in the gravity of his gaze. His words, his scent, his sheer proximity. It was all pressing against the walls I had so painstakingly erected around my heart. Sijuan, I breathed, my voice breaking on his name. He didn't kiss me, not then. But he leaned forward and rested his forehead against mine, our breaths mingling in the small space between us. For a single, suspended moment the world went silent. There was just him, just me, and the terrifying, dangerous promise of something I thought I had given up on forever. Let me in, Hyen Wu, he whispered against my skin. Please. The kiss was a mistake. I repeated this to myself like a prayer the next morning, pacing the cramped confines of my living room as Yuna slept peacefully in her bed. My lips still tingled, a traitorous echo of how quickly I had surrendered, how my body, starved for warmth and kindness, had responded to his touch, his scent, his gentle dominance. For years I had sworn off alphas. I didn't need one to complete me, to protect me, to save me. I had survived the hell of being cast aside once. I would never allow myself to be that vulnerable again. And yet, when Sijuan's lips had met mine the night before, when his hand had cradled the back of my neck as if I were something precious, I hadn't fought it. I had kissed him back with a desperate, hungry longing that shamed me to my core. Hyen Wu. His voice sliced through my frantic thoughts. I stopped pacing and saw him leaning against the bedroom doorway, his arms crossed over his chest, watching me with that infuriatingly calm expression. He had already been up for hours. The comforting aroma of rice porridge was wafting through the apartment. Stop overthinking, he said, his tone gentle. I shot him a glare. I'm not. You are, he countered, walking towards me with an unhurried, confident stride that made my stomach flutter. You've been wearing a path in the floor since sunrise. You're afraid. I have every right to be, I retorted, my voice cracking. You don't get it, Sijuan. You have no idea what it feels like to be chosen, used, and then thrown away like garbage. To raise a child while the world whispers behind your back that you're a failure. To fight for every breath, every single day. He stopped directly in front of me, so close I had to crane my neck to meet his intense gaze. "You're right," he said, his voice soft, disarming. "I don't know that pain. But I know this. I will never, ever throw you away. And I will stand with you against every whisper, every storm, every single thing that tries to bring you or Yuna harm. Whether you let me or not." The sincerity in his voice was a physical blow. My chest ached with the desperate desire to believe him, but trust was a currency I no longer possessed. "You don't just get to decide that," I whispered. His hand came up, his callous thumb brushing against my cheek. My traitorous body leaned into his touch before my mind could protest. "Maybe not," he conceded, "but I get to prove it to you. Every day. For as long as it takes." Before I could find the words to respond, a weak, rattling cough echoed from the bedroom. My heart seized in my chest. I darted past him, rushing to Yuna's side. She was pale again, a sheen of sweat slicking her dark hair to her forehead. "Mommy," she whimpered, her small body trembling. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here," I soothed, stroking her hair as panic clawed its way up my throat. Behind me, I heard Sejuan already on his phone, his voice firm and decisive. "We're going to the hospital. Now." I wanted to argue, to bring up the cost, to insist we could manage. But as I held Yuna's shaking form in my arms, I knew all arguments were futile. There was nothing left to do but surrender. Hospitals, I decided, smelled of fear. Beneath the sterile scent of antiseptic and bleach, there was an undercurrent of quiet dread that clung to the air. No matter how brightly lit the corridors were, no matter how professionally the nurses smiled, I couldn't shake the suffocating feeling of being trapped. Yuna lay in the sterile white bed, dwarfed by the machines that beeped and whirred around her. Wires snaked from her small body to monitors that displayed the fragile rhythm of her life. Her chest rose and fell, slow, too slow, but steady for now. I clutched her tiny hand, my thumb tracing the delicate blue veins beneath her skin. "Mommy's right here," I whispered, more to reassure myself than her. "Don't you be scared." But I was terrified enough for the both of us. Behind me, Sejuan paced, a restless energy emanating from him. He had been a constant, grounding presence for hours. His alpha sent a source of comfort I was ashamed to admit I needed. He hadn't left my side, not even for a moment. "Hien Wu," he started quietly. I shook my head, my eyes still fixed on Yuna. Please don't tell me it's going to be okay. If you say that, I think I'll fall apart." He was silent for a long moment. Then, I felt his large, warm hand settle on my shoulder, a firm, anchoring weight. "Then fall apart," he whispered, his voice close to my ear. "I'll be here to hold the pieces together." That was all it took. The dam I had so carefully constructed inside me finally broke. A raw, ugly sob tore its way out of my throat. I bent over the bed, pressing Yuna's hand to my forehead as years of unshed tears soaked the clean white sheets. And Sejuan was there. His arms came around me from behind, pulling me back against his solid chest. His chin rested on my shoulder, his scent enveloping me, surrounding me until I felt like I was drowning in it, and it was the only thing keeping me afloat. "I've got you," he murmured, over and over, his voice a steady mantra against my ear. "I've got you." I hated how much I needed him in that moment. I hated how right it felt to be held by him. When the storm of my grief finally subsided, I looked up, my vision blurry with tears. His face was inches from mine, his eyes burning with an emotion so fierce, so profound, it stole my breath away. And before I could think, before I could stop myself, I leaned in and my lips brushed against his. It was nothing like our first kiss. That one had been hesitant, a question asked in the heat of a moment. This was a statement, deliberate, slow, and utterly shattering. He cupped my face in his hands, deepening the kiss, his mouth claiming mine with a desperate tenderness. The sterile hospital air faded away, replaced by the taste of him, the feel of him, the overwhelming reality of him. Hyen Woo, he breathed against my lips when we finally broke apart. Let me love you. Fresh tears streamed down my face, but they weren't tears of fear or grief anymore. They were tears for the terrifying, beautiful possibility that maybe, just maybe, he actually meant it. The first rays of morning light streamed through the blinds, painting stripes across the hospital room floor. I was curled in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, my body aching with exhaustion, but I hadn't slept. My gaze was fixed on Yuna. She was still pale, still fragile, but a faint touch of pink had returned to her lips. Her breathing was even and deep. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I could breathe too. A soft knock sounded at the door. I assumed it was a nurse and didn't move, but then the door creaked open, and that familiar scent, pine and strength and safety, filled the room. Hyen Woo. I looked up. Sejun stood in the doorway, his dark hair disheveled as if he hadn't slept either. He held a small paper bag, a wisp of steam curling from the top. You didn't eat last night, he stated simply. Or this morning. My mouth opened, but no words came out. I wanted to deny my hunger, to insist I was fine, but my body betrayed me with a low grumble. He placed the bag on the small bedside table and then knelt in front of my chair, his eyes searching mine with that gentle, relentless intensity. Hyen Woo, he said softly, stop trying to run on empty. My throat tightened. I didn't know if I wanted to scream at him for seeing right through me or fall into his arms. But before I could do either, the door was thrown open with such force that it slammed against the wall. Lee Won. His face was a thundercloud, his powerful presence sucking all the air from the room. He strode in, his furious gaze slicing past Sejun and landing directly on me. Why didn't you call me? He snarled, his voice low and sharp. Why did I have to find out from someone else that my daughter was in the hospital? I flinched as if he'd struck me. My daughter. The words were a brand, a claim of ownership, not love. She's not an object for you to claim, Sejun said quietly, rising to his full height. He subtly positioned himself between Lee Won and me, a silent protector. The tension in the room crackled. Two powerful alphas locked in a battle of wills. Lee Won's eyes narrowed into slits. You really think you can replace me? There was a beat of silence. I felt Sejun's hand brush against mine. Not a grab, but a light, grounding touch. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but it held a conviction that sent a shiver down my spine. I don't have to replace you, he said, because you were never really here in the first place. Lee Won's nostrils flared. He took another aggressive step forward, his burning gaze fixed on me. Hyen Woo, come home. Now, before this gets any worse. My entire body trembled. The room seemed to tilt on its axis, my past and my present colliding in a terrifying explosion. The past that had broken me, and the present that offered a terrifying glimpse of healing. Sijuan's voice cut through the fog of my panic, steady and unwavering. Haiyan-Wu belongs where he is loved and cherished. And if that is something you are incapable of providing, then you need to step aside. The day Yuna was discharged from the hospital, the world felt both impossibly large and achingly small. Her tiny hand was fisted in the fabric of my shirt as I carried her. Her body still so terrifyingly light it made my heart clench. "Appa," she whispered, her voice raspy but clearer than it had been in weeks. "Can we go home now?" My throat closed over. Home. What was home? Was it the cold, empty room we rented? Or was it the portable sense of warmth and safety that seemed to follow Sijuan wherever he went? "Yes, my love," I murmured, kissing the top of her head. "We're going home." But it wasn't me who juggled the bags of medication or sorted through the mountain of discharge paperwork. It was Sijuan, his movements calm and efficient, refusing to let me carry the burdens alone. When we stepped out of the hospital's revolving doors, the bright sunlight made me blink. Yuna squinted, then reached a small hand out towards Sijuan. Without a moment's hesitation, he took her from my arms, lifting her as if she were made of precious glass and holding her close to his chest. I should have objected. I should have said something about boundaries, about not confusing her, about my pride. But I couldn't find the words, because watching them together didn't feel wrong. Felt terrifyingly, overwhelmingly right. That night, back in our small, grim apartment, I found myself seeing it through a stranger's eyes. The peeling wallpaper, the thin mattress on the floor that served as our bed, the bare shelves of the refrigerator. A hot wave of shame washed over me, but Sijuan didn't sneer or pity. He just gently settled Yuna into bed, tucking the blankets around her with practiced care. Then he turned to me. "Haiyan-Wu," he said quietly, his voice resonating in the small space. "You've been carrying this all by yourself for too long. Let me help you carry it." I shook my head, hot tears stinging my eyes. "You don't understand. People don't help without a price. Alphas don't help. They take. They possess. They break you." He stepped towards me. His hand came up, hesitating for a fraction of a second before it rested on my cheek. His thumb gently brushed away a tear I hadn't even realized had fallen. "I don't want to cage you," he murmured, his gaze holding mine. "I want to give you a home. With me. With her." His words didn't break me. They healed something deep inside me that I thought had been shattered beyond repair. And when he leaned down, his movements slow and deliberate, giving me every opportunity to pull away, I didn't. Our lips met softly at first, a tentative question. Then, as if a dam had broken in both of us, the kiss deepened, becoming hungry and desperate, a testament to years of starvation. When he finally pulled back, his forehead rested against mine, his breathing ragged. "Tell me to stop, Haiyan-Wu, and I will walk away right now. But for the love of God, don't ask me to stop loving you." I couldn't speak. The words were trapped in my throat. So instead, I pulled his head back down to mine and kissed him again, my body trembling with a potent mix of fear and life. Hours later, tucked against his side in the darkness, with Yuna sleeping soundly in the next room, I found myself lying in the circle of his arm. His heartbeat was a steady, reassuring rhythm against my ear. I should have been terrified. I should have been consumed by guilt. Instead, for the first time in 4 years, I felt safe. "Sijuan," I whispered into the quiet. "What if I'm not strong enough? What if I break again?" His arm tightened around my waist, pulling me impossibly closer. Then I'll be here to catch the pieces. I swallowed hard against the lump in my throat, finally daring to believe him. But that fragile peace was shattered the next morning by a violent, rattling knock on the door. I went rigid. My body knew who it was before my mind did. When I opened it, Li Wan stood there, his eyes bloodshot, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. "So," he said, his voice a low drawl as his gaze flickered from me to the unmistakable presence of Sijuan behind me. "You really thought it would be that easy to replace me?" Li Wan's hand slammed against the doorframe, the wood groaning under the force. "Open your eyes, Haiyan Wu. He's using you. An alpha like him, a pack alpha? They don't rescue strays out of kindness. They do it for power, for possession." Behind me, Sijuan was a silent mountain of strength. "He's wrong," Sijuan said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable power. "And you know he is." Li Wan's gaze bored into mine, trying to ignite the old embers of fear and submission. "You belong to me, Haiyan Wu. You always have. Don't you forget that." For years, those words would have been my chains. They would have made me lower my head and accept my fate. But this time, something was different. This time, the faint sound of Yuna's happy babbling drifted from the other room. This time, Sijuan's hand brushed against mine, a silent anchor in the present, not the past. "No," I whispered, my voice shaking, but not with fear. It was the tremor of a thing about to break free. I lifted my chin, meeting Li Wan's furious gaze head-on. "I was never an object to be owned, and I will never be yours." The room fell silent. Even my own heart seemed to stop for a beat. Li Wan's handsome face twisted into an ugly mask of rage. "You will regret this." Before he could take another step, Sijuan moved, positioning himself like an iron wall between us. "Leave," he said. The word was not a request. It was a command, calm, final, and absolute. "Or I will make sure you are never able to come near them again." The door finally slammed shut, the sound echoing the end of an era. My legs gave out and I crumpled to the floor. Sijuan was there in an instant, kneeling, gathering me into his arms as shuddering sobs of pure, unadulterated relief racked my body. "I did it," I choked out, my face buried in his shirt. I told him no. I told him I wasn't his. "You were so brave," he whispered, his forehead pressed against mine. He cradled my face in his hands, looking at me as if I were the most precious thing he had ever seen. "I am so proud of you." His words, his touch, his unwavering belief in me. It broke me wide open. And when his lips found mine, there was no hesitation. There was no pride. There was no fear. There was only us. That night, for the first time, it wasn't about survival. It was about choosing and being chosen in return. He showed me what it was to be cherished, to be worshipped. His touch was a reverent prayer on my skin, healing old wounds I didn't even know I still carried. In the quiet darkness, our bodies spoke a language of promises kept and futures written together. When I finally let him in, completely and without reservation, it felt less like a surrender and more like a homecoming. I awoke to golden sunlight spilling across the mattress, with Sijuan's arm wrapped securely around my waist, his steady breathing a comfort against my back. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up with a knot of dread in my stomach. I woke up with hope, but peace is a fragile thing. A knock on the door, followed by a neighbor's hushed, urgent voice through the thin walls, shattered it completely. "Li Wan, he went to his old pack. He's telling everyone you stole his daughter." He's gathering them to come and take her back. My blood ran cold. Sujuin stirred behind me, instantly awake and alert. He pressed a kiss to my shoulder. "We will face him," he murmured, his voice a solid promise. "Together. You are not alone anymore." And as terrifying as the thought of that confrontation was, I knew he was right. I wasn't alone. And that changed everything. The final confrontation came not with a whisper, but with a roar. Li Wan stood at my door, and behind him, a dozen alphas from his pack stood like a silent, hostile army. "Give me my daughter," he commanded, his voice ringing with an authority he had never earned. Yuna whimpered behind me, clinging to my leg. Sujuin moved to stand in front of me, a shield of muscle and will. "Stay behind me," he murmured. "No," I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Not this time. I have to do this." I stepped out from behind him, walking past the fear that had been my jailer for so long, until I stood face to face with the man who had once owned my silence. "She is not just a possession for you to claim," I said, my voice shaking but carrying through the tense hallway. "You never wanted her. You never loved me. You only ever loved the idea of owning us." A wave of murmurs rippled through Li Wan's pack. His face darkened with fury, but I wasn't finished. "I am her parent. I decide who is fit to be in her life. I decide who her family is." I turned then, my gaze finding Sujuin. I looked at the man who had held us, fed us, protected us, and loved us without condition. "And I choose him." Sujuin's expression softened, a mixture of pride and overwhelming love shining in his eyes. He stepped forward, not with aggression, but with quiet certainty, and wrapped his arms around my shoulders, holding me close. "You heard him," Sujuin said, his voice calm but resonating with the indisputable power of a true alpha. "This Omega and this child are under my protection. They are my family. Not because I demanded it, but because we chose each other. And anyone," his voice sharpened, becoming hard as iron, "who dares to threaten them will answer directly to me." The sheer weight of his dominance filled the space, not choking or aggressive, but absolute. The other alphas shifted, their bravado faltering under his unwavering gaze. Li Wan tried to snarl, to rally his forces, but his voice cracked. "You can't just take what's mine. We were never yours to lose," I said, my voice cutting through his pathetic attempt at control. And in the silence that followed, I knew it was over. His power was a hollow shell, and Sujuin had just shattered it. One by one, the alphas from his pack averted their eyes, shame and uncertainty replacing their hostility. They turned and walked away, leaving Li Wan standing alone in the hallway. He looked from me to Sujuin, his eyes wild and desperate. For the first time, I didn't see a monster. I just saw a coward. "You'll regret this," he hissed, the threat now empty and pathetic. He stumbled back, turned, and was gone. Gone from my home. Gone from my life. I collapsed against Sujuin, shaking with the force of my relief. His arms were instantly around me, strong and sure. "You did it," he whispered into my hair. "It's over. You're free." That night, our love was not a desperate clinging in the darkness, but a celebration in the light. There were no more shadows, no more ghosts of the past. It was just us. His lips traced the story of my survival on my skin, and his hands held me like I was something sacred. "I love you, Haiyan Wu," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I will spend the rest of my life showing you and Yuna how much." and I finally, completely, let myself believe him. Weeks later, I stood in a park, the sun warm on my face. A sound I hadn't heard in years filled the air, Yuna's laughter. It was full-throated and joyous, a sound of pure, unadulterated happiness. She ran, her cheeks rosy with health, straight into Sijuan's open arms. "Daddy!" she squealed as he caught her, spinning her around until they were both dizzy with delight. He looked up at me over her head, and the love in his smile was so bright, it took my breath away. I walked towards them, no longer afraid of the future. I wasn't walking it alone anymore. We were a family, forged not by blood or tradition, but by choice. And our choice had made us stronger than anything. So, that's how Haiyan Wu finally found his freedom and his true family. It was a long and painful journey, but one that ended in the warmth of the sun. What did you think of his decision to finally stand up to Li Wan? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you loved this story of resilience and love conquering all, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories that will touch your heart. Thank you for listening.